So I think we were talking about, first we talked about resource recovery, renewable energy generation, then high-speed rail maintenance yard. So perhaps the next thing that makes sense might be light industrial.
Okay. So the basic light industrial use is an industrial use similar to manufacturing. And so the question is, do you see not necessarily the buildings that are there now, but the types of industrial uses that you have on the Baylands now continuing into the future, being there long term? It was pointed out during the break that renewable energy can be identified as a light industrial use, so maybe we should keep light industrial. The other option is to just say renewable energy and not include the other light industrial, which would be manufacturing, assembly, and other types of uses that would bring trucks on the site. Your decision, however you would want to go with that.
So just a note, and to help us discuss more thoroughly, if you look at H.1.4, under industrial uses, the trade commercial is providing for a mix of the general plan's description of what trade commercial is, which includes industrial uses, is a mix of commercial uses including warehouses, distribution facilities, offices, retail uses, restaurants, commercial recreation, personal services such as well as light industrial, research and development, and uses of similar character. So that pretty much covers a good number of our list. So in thinking about that, keep those other items in mind.
The concern I have in this particular one is the warehousing. You know, as far as the research and development, I think most of the survey shows that people agree with that, but warehousing is another story, and we are still struggling in the Crocker Park. And we don't want to bring all those big trucking and all that. So I think if we have to modify that particular part, I will suggest that we should take out the warehousing.
Okay, so the light industrial that we have in Industrial Way does not include warehousing, or it does? Currently?
Currently it does.
Yeah, I don't think I want to change that.
I guess the question is whether or not there's, again, like other facilities that are grandfathered or non-conforming. You have to kind of look at the world as it is today versus what you're planning for. And if the expectation is that area will be redeveloped as part of a larger specific plan. So I think you have to,
I thought all along that we were promising them that we would find another alternative area for them to be. I mean, that's an area that certain types of businesses, that's pretty unique, and there's not a viable area as other places, or at least that's my understanding.
So you like to keep the warehousing in the Baylands?
Well, I think that we should keep. Yeah, I think some of the businesses should be grandfathered in. We're not talking about a huge amount of trucks going in and out of Industrial Way. I don't think it's appropriate on that street. It's a little tiny street.
But that's just only one small portion of that. But if you keep that as allowable, then they can have the warehousing anywhere in the Bayland site.
Now, isn't it the case that we could subdivide the Baylands into different areas? I mean, it's already landfill, OU1 and OU2.
Yeah, that might be a possible way to include that in Industrial Way.
I mean, why would we take something out that? I mean, there's the prop business. There's Sunset Garage.
I don't think we'll take that out. They will be grandfathered out. But I was saying is the new businesses in the middle of the Baylands, people will have a problem with a lot of truck traffic and all that. So that was my concern. I
tend to agree with Commissioner Parker. I think that there's a lot of areas in the Baylands where warehousing and light industrial are good uses, especially freight forwarding near freeway on-ramps. I know like that one area is highly in contention. It's going to be Recology, a freight forwarding facility, and the high-speed rail yard. But be that as it may, since we're just talking about permitted uses, I would be inclined to say that light industrial would be a permitted use, although if we wanted to subdivide the Baylands into different areas and say that we don't want light industrial everywhere, that might be an option as well.
I feel that certain things are going to stay there. I mean, we have the lumber yard. It's going to go somewhere. And I'd like to see light industrial because I'd like to see some of the craft businesses be able to stay and grow. And that's one of the nice things about Industrial Way is that provides a location for craft industries to set up. I mean, currently we now have Brisbane Beer, I think. I don't remember the name of it, but it's something like that. And
would the lumber yard be distribution? No, would it be warehousing, or what's the category? It's certainly one of the light industrial uses.
Yeah, your existing lumber yard is in some ways a retail use, in some ways a wholesale use. Based on what I've heard, let me make a suggestion because there's a distinction that I'm making in my mind, having seen big-scale warehousing when you just have the term warehousing. So you would retain that description that would have R&D, but in terms of light industrial and warehousing, I would call it small-scale craft business, as opposed to the 100, 200, and bigger warehouse that generally ships with 18-wheelers as opposed to the smaller package vans that you're seeing moving in and out now. And I think that's consistent with a number of the scenarios that you have, if that makes sense to you.
I suppose, if I had an aspiration, it would be that we would welcome, I mean, Hunters Point is going to be closing down a lot of its craft areas. I don't know exactly when. We have a very good harpsichord maker, I think, who is in Hunters Point, and I think he's, from what I understand, is going to lose his place eventually. I think that, we should create areas where hopefully they would be in an area that, the rents wouldn't be prohibited because they're not so fantastically desirable, and we could continue to have spaces like that. I think that would be, there's going to be all types of places like that. I think where he is, there's a sail maker, and I don't remember what all is in that building. But I would like to be able to see the Baylands somehow welcoming some of the people who are going to be losing their areas for their livelihoods. And I think there's enough kind of crummy areas that are going to be in the Baylands, that we could kind of have places like that. I would hate to say crummy, but
I think the word warehouse is associated with a large trucking operation. So if we can, what she's saying is actually a mini warehousing of some sort.
Yeah, a mini warehouse has its own specific definition, but the small-scale craft businesses, incubator, there's a lot of different descriptions, but the idea would be to get away from the larger-scale truck-intensive warehouses and industrial, like you see some north of here. If you've ever been down to Ontario Airport, when I hear warehouse, that's
warehousing, yeah.
That's warehousing. You get some of the really big ones, and that I think we've heard in a lot of earlier hearings and discussions. No, industrial is prohibited in the Baylands. I think you're talking about a much different kind of business that's not truck intensive, the big truck intensive. It's specialty. It fits with a in a community as opposed to the big manufacturer. And we can work with that.
So maybe we can change it to mini warehousing or something.
I'll come up with the right phrasing, and the idea is
Is
I have a general direction.
welcome new startup.
Yeah.
we can bring that back to you. Yeah.
The phrasing should probably also specifically say no heavy industrial.
Well,
It's currently not permitted.
Right.
Does that include recology?
I believe that recology is heavy commercial, not heavy industrial.
so I think we just work with what is already here in terms of what the general plan states. And in terms of placement, the existing C1 and M1 areas would come into play as well.
Also, I have a question regarding the M1 manufacturing zoning district. Is that part of Bayland now, the M1 zoning?
That district is part of the specific plan area, yes, part of the EIR.
Because there was a question about what the definition of M1 zoning was and all that. And I believe that council recently had some, that has to do with the project on the Bay Shore.
Yeah. And again, I think you want to look at this as dealing with the zoning districts as they exist today in their current boundaries versus, if this area of that M1 area is absorbed into this larger specific plan, this larger specific plan will govern its future government regulations and development. So we're dealing with two different maybe a phasing issue here of the current M1, but it would be subsumed if a plan is adopted that covers the M1 area.
I have a question about that. Isn't the current C1 and the current M1 actually TC? I mean, aren't those obsolete, no longer applicable zones under the general plan?
Yeah.
Again, as part of the specific plan, the zoning categories will be brought into consistency with whatever's adopted. Yes, the M1 title is going to be rechanged. That was what Commissioner Menier was talking about. That was direction by the council.
Yeah, it's going to be changed, but I mean today, I'm seeing it a lot, and it seems a little confusing because it seems to me that it would be more accurate to call it like Industrial Way TC and Baylands TC rather than C1 and M1.
And that's what we can bring that into consistency with when a plan is adopted, the general plan categories and the zoning will be brought into consistency. We can't administratively change zoning titles. That is a zoning code amendment.
So the M1 is a title that's in use today for industrial?
Yes.
And the same for C1?
C1,
is it
yes.
a title that's in use today?
Yes.
So we're okay with that? So light industrial that would subsume retail, office, research and development, and warehousing.
So I have a question to ask.
Small scale.
Right.
Yeah, I have a question. So if another group similar or but different to the lumber yard wants to use the area, are we saying no or yes? Would that be warehousing? Would that be trade commercial? I mean, certainly.
Well, a mix of commercial uses, right?
That will not be warehousing.
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't. So what would it be?
I don't know what
Commercial.
it's called.
So if there's something that comes in similar to the or wants to come in similar to the lumber yard,
But-
what would we call that? I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to say, no, we don't like that kind of thing because it's a big box. I mean,
So if it says here mix of commercial uses, including, but that doesn't exclude, that's not to the exclusion of others, right?
Correct.
right.
So I guess what Carolyn's asking is, does that fall within mix of commercial uses?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so then the next question that comes in is that, okay, so say, if we say that, then would something big such as a Fry's want to come in? I mean, what would we say to something like that?
That's allowable.
That's a
Fry-
It's a
Fry-
pretty big warehouse, but it actually is.
Yeah.
We don't have anything like a Fry's right around here.
Fry's.
I could see something like that wanting to come in.
That's a retail operation.
Uh huh.
Yeah, and big box retail is a retail.
And we've prohibited big box retail. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we'll talk about. Remember, retail is one of the questions that we'll talk about tonight, and then come back to scale. So if we want to move to retail right now, we could do that. So the question is retail an appropriate use within the Baylands? I think every scenario, all the alternatives include some extent of retail.
Yes.
That one was easy because we'll talk about how much and scale, which would get into how much when we talk about land use and land use arrangements.
I mean, and I'm sure I hate the idea of having a big box. And I always look at the Baylands and I go, God, I bet Fry's would love to be here. And we don't have a Fry's.
So is Home Depot.
Well, there's plenty of Home Depots. but that's just always, ever since I moved in, I looked at it and I went, boy, I bet they would like that.
And that's the question for the subsequent deliberations, the scale of the use, because given the size of the community, something the size of a Home Depot, a Fry's, will need to, is a commercial use of a scale that's drawing from a large area.
Right.
We'll talk about that kind of scaling of commercial when we get to development intensity and location.
So I have a question for the planning department. If something like a Fry's wanted to come into VWR, would that be prohibited or not? It's just, I've always, in back of my mind, seen this as a good location for a Fry's.
I think they're looking right now.
We'll look up our zoning and we can get back.
Okay.
They're checking zoning.
Okay.
So
I just was wondering because it just seems like.
while they're looking at that, if we want to move to the next use.
Right. Okay.
Great.
Office related, would offices be part of Baylands development? I think all of the scenarios include office. There's a lot of, the discussion of commercial office as retail mix of uses. I think only one alternative, actually the renewable energy alternative, calls out retail and R&D and does not have a office category, that something that office would fit into. Question for you tonight is, should office be part of that list, the description of the Baylands as it really is today? I see heads nodding. So okay, I'll take that as a yes, and we'll go to the next one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then hotels and convention facilities. Should that be included in the mix? This is one you may or may not want to actually ultimately put on a land use map, but have it as a permitted use within an area that might be called commercial office. Question is, do you want to include that as a specific use and that description of uses permitted within the Baylands?
Well, it's vaguely similar to housing in that people sleep there, but for shorter terms, I'm wondering if we want to discuss it with housing.
We can go ahead and add it to the list, and then we can go back and modify after we have that discussion. So for today, yes or no? Yes, for now.
The convention facilities are not the residential element there. It's basically an auditorium where people come and gather.
It's like Moscone Center.
Moscone Center.
Right.
But the hotel is, I guess, is on the borderline.
Right.
And we'll talk about the residential use in relation to remediation and contamination. Mm-hmm. The basic difference that we'll get to next week is, if you picture the way that the analysis of a residential goes, is contact of the person in that use in a home with the contaminated ground surface, as opposed to they're there over a long period of time, and some of the assumptions on how long, as opposed to somebody going to hotels saying for a couple nights what is their contact with ground surface over a long period of time. It's far different than a residential use, even though it's similar in that they're sleeping overnight. So the issue that a hotel would be most similar to residential would be noise. What's an appropriate noise level? But if I'm understanding, what one of you said is we would keep for tonight hotel, convention center on the list, and if you want to loop back to that when we have that specific discussion of remediation and residential next week, you can, or next meeting, you can do that. Or if you want to do it after that meeting, because there'll be enough to talk about with just residential.
Yeah, I think post-meeting.
Okay.
Could I just clarify one thing? When it says it's recognized in the sustainability framework, web of mutual efficiency, I think in the framework we describe that as multi-use development most of the time. And so for tonight, I think consideration on my part, yes, but we specifically focus on a location for hotels and conventions in the framework as part of the multimodal station. So yes, with the subsequent deliberation on location, as far as. Okay.
Good.
Okay. Thanks.
Good.
I'll keep that note. Okay. The next one that we haven't discussed yet is the arena concert venue. There we are. And that one is proposed. It's included in the entertainment variant. The other thing that was different in the DSP entertainment variant is included large multiplex, which really would be part of commercial office. So it's really, in planning terms, part of that retail use. So the question would be here, do you see an arena of some size or a concert venue of some size out on the Baylands?
No.
In the Roundhouse?
No, I don't.
No.
The only no, not huge. I just see maybe the Roundhouse being used.
Well, I don't think the Roundhouse is a concert facility. The big problem with a large arena is that people will come and go to it in large numbers before and after events, and it's already been illustrated that the traffic is pretty bad.
And also
Can't support that.
I've been trying to put together, helping with the Live at Mission Blue. I know just what we don't need is another huge concert hall.
Right.
And we have one that's a very good concert hall for small events already in the city.
Yeah.
So what we can do in terms of that use is, the large-scale arena concert venue would not be included, but we would identify that smaller venues such as the Roundhouse, we don't want to, then you have things like the concert in the park. Do we really want to
I think intimate and, contained events kind of fall into that.
Smaller venues.
Yes.
Smaller venues.
As part of a retail setup, as part of an office plaza, as part of the town green, town green.
Right.
Those would make much more. Okay.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we've only got 2 left on the list.
Do we want to do schools or commercial?
Okay. Commercial recreation is included in that list of uses right now. The question is, do you want to retain that? Because there's just a large number of different specific kinds of commercial recreation uses. And so by saying, yes, let's keep that as part of the list, you're not saying, yes, the presentation we heard is what we want to do, but you would be saying, no, we're not saying no to it, and there could be other types of commercial recreation uses.
As long as it's not commercial recreation that falls into the previously discussed category of large arena.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then I think I'd be in favor of it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I'm for commercial recreation.
Okay.
Schools.
Schools. And as we talked about, in terms of public schools, that is to a great extent out of your hands. You don't need to show it on a land use map, not show it on a land use map, specifically include it, not include it, and schools as part of, in many communities, they don't designate schools. They're just part of a residential area, typically part of a residential area. So if you would say yes to residential, the school, so that kids aren't going all the way across Bayshore, it's a neighborhood school they could walk to, and the presumption would be any schools would need to be mitigated to meet standards and to essentially qualify for the waiver based on specific mitigation in relation to whatever standards might be of concern.
It seems that tying it to residential makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I can see having certain type of schools, but I wouldn't call them schools. I was thinking something similar to having schools around the Roundhouse where they start working on teaching some of the old crafts. So I wouldn't say, no schools in that aspect, but...
Well, we're talking about schools as part of a school
But we're
district,
talking
not
about
like a business
public
that teaches
schools.
things, right?
That's...
Are those different?
Yeah.
We can draw a distinction in a couple ways. One would be the K through 12 school of general instruction. Other would be a specialized educational facility, so that essentially if you had a rail yard, you could have educational classes there. You could, in your trade schools, would be something else that are more geared towards adults as opposed to minors. And so schools...
it's something that the schools could be incorporated as part of the... Not a school set up as a school per se.
A specialized educational facility, I won't call it.
Or that we could turn a certain area into ad hoc. I don't know how to put it.
That you would, to run specialized educational programs as opposed to having a general...
Designated school.
Okay.
I
And then if they want
will also limit that to the adult education. I think the whole site has, for the kindergarten and all that. I don't think this.
But if we have something like, from what I can gather from what Chris Hart has been talking about, it'd be a good idea to take certain areas like that and teach some of the old crafts. I mean, certainly, we are raising young adults to have no particular skills except playing games.
I think in that case, if you're talking about, if there is we'll just use a rail facility and teaching mechanics of locomotive, I'm just making something up.
Something.
That's really an activity rather than a specific use, so you don't need to describe. To permit educational activities that are secondary to the uses that are on the site is just part of it. And really what we're talking about is, if I heard correctly, the idea of a general instruction K-12 school would be something tied to whatever recommendation comes out on residential. And trade schools and adult would be something that would be permitted, because that's very different than the general instruction K-12. Right.
For the I think the majority of the commissioners here are in favor of tying it to the residential. For the record, I'm not necessarily in agreement with that. I think they can be separate. It should be separate.
Could you clarify what your point is? That what your position is? That you are in favor of schools even if there's no residential? Because I don't know that.
No school. I was taking it interpreted as the consideration of if there's no housing, there's no schools. There's no schools. There's no housing. I think there could be housing without schools.
There could be.
That's what I was meaning.
Yeah. So are you saying that you're not in favor of schools even if there's housing?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of K through.
Yes. Yes.
That's
I'm
what
not
you're
in
saying.
favor of that.
Right.
So that distinction can be decided when we have the residential conversation.
Irrespective of that, even we have a residential component, I will still
Yes.
not agree with the K through.
Well, there's
Right.
really no place that's wonderful for schools.
Well, that particular area has a lot of elements that are really bad. Very difficult to locate on that particular.
I was
site.
at a meeting of the city council, and I think that Genetech, I believe it was Genetech, wanted to build a school, and the airport said it was too close to the airport, and they didn't want to have it. And we're not that far away from an airport, so, and they, we don't want the flight patterns over Brisbane, but
Now, not only that, there are several.
I mean that's like,
Yeah, the airport.
and that's just one reason. I mean, then there's the contamination of the everything else.
Yeah, let me try and summarize where we are, because I know that the idea is that the K through 12 general instruction school, so the typical classrooms in school, grades K through 12, whether that would be included in your list of uses will be would follow your discussion of residential. As you look at like the community prepared plan, there's a proposed charter high school sitting there, but no residential anywhere on that plan. Does that make sense to you? As opposed to if there was residential on the site, then a school that follows makes, to me, a lot more sense, depending on what you decide on residential.
But myself and Commissioner Reinhardt already not in favor of K through 12
Got
at
it.
that particular site.
Period.
Okay.
So I guess we're saying that we are tentatively putting it on there for future discussion.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes? Is that right?
What
Commissioner
remains?
Reinhardt? That's right? Yeah, okay. Yes, that's correct.
I just don't want to prohibit education and say if
You would
No.
not be, yeah, by,
No, I don't
by,
think that's what
We're
they're
not
saying.
being prohibited.
Yeah, I
but
don't
it's
think that's
not
what
an
they're saying.
by
appropriate-
including or not including that kind of traditional school, you would not be saying prohibiting educational activities related
right.
to the uses that are out there.
okay.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Good.
Okay. So that's our list of 12?
There's one more. Is that it?
No, that
No,
was
That's
it.
it.
Oh, we went back to retail. Okay.
Yeah, we're done.
And
Right?
we did research and developing.
Yes, we have.
That was part of that.
That was part of light industrial.
Great.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. So at this point, our deliberations are complete. And as a reminder to the public hearings have closed. So there is no requirement for additional public input. However, to incorporate and stimulate thorough thought, we've created a public comment section. So with that, if you are inclined to make a public comment based solely on the issues that we're discussing in deliberations tonight, please fill out a form. And again, I'd like to remind you to please respect the fact that you're allocated 3 minutes. So please keep to your 3-minute mark. And there will be no debate or rebuttal. So we'll give some folks a few more minutes to fill out. Currently, we have 3. And we'll call them in the order that was received. Okay? So Mr. Robert Nolo or Noto? Okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Robert Noto. I'm President of San Mateo County Building and Construction Trades Council. I'm here to represent 16,000 men and women of the most highly skilled and highly trained workforce in the construction industry. The diverse workforce from San Mateo County, many of whom live in Brisbane, are proud of the work they have done and the work they are going to continue to do in this county. The jobs they have allow them to live in this county and provide for their families. They understand the critical need of moving forward with the Baylands site. By moving forward tonight, the Commission will be providing more good-paying jobs with benefits for our members and their families. They will also clear a needed path for Brisbane and the Bay Area to continue adding parts needed that makes this region one of the most innovative places for ideas on the planet. There is a lot of pressure to build large campuses and headquarters for top Bay Area companies, but we need to act now if we want to catch the wave. The building trades are prepared to use their skills and talents to build a commercial campus, which is in demand by companies desiring a transit-oriented location like the Baylands for their employees. The benefit of public transportation for companies' employees is also a benefit to a region's population and economy. The potential for revenue to the city of Brisbane and economic benefits of the potential to raise the living standards of those on the peninsula is greater than any other project in recent memory. The building trades appreciates the work the Commission has done toward developing a plan that not only addresses the needs of their citizens, but also the needs of the surrounding region that this vast parcel of land offers. The trades stand by to build your vision that your citizens will look upon with great pride. And on a personal note, I'd like to thank you for your commitment to sustainable building. That is right in our wheelhouse with the training we do nowadays in the building trades. We are the best trained workforce in the country in this area, and that's our building. And on another personal note, if you build a golf course, you'll capture some of my tax dollars.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Anya Miller.
Thank you, and welcome again for another little statement here from me. I'm addressing the table on your page H1.2 that defines the different land uses proposed by different scenarios and includes a renewable energy alternative that we have proposed. And I should just add that, for instance, office is definitely one of the things that we find, it's just compatible with research and development. And even in our presentation to you, we mentioned that related offices. So that this is the, and as far as the arena, see, the Credible idea was above all to use the input that was given way back when we had the public meetings and people were talking about land uses exactly, and all these general plan land uses were discussed. And so we started with that, and we were so horrified when we heard how many square feet were put in as if they were community proposed, which wasn't. The community never was asked how much development. So we said, hey, how much should we have besides the renewable energy? So that's why we limited the area. That was the focus, to 1 million. And we feel that there's a lot of flexibility. We didn't want to say so much retail, so much R&D, so much this and that. Okay, if there's an arena, why not? If it fits, so we're open. We're not going to take a position on that. As long as it fits within the limit of development buildings that we suggested, 1 million square feet. If you fit in that arena, fine. If you fit in that entertainment and a high-speed rail, we talked to them, and they are excited about having a solar on top. And if you want more than 100 acres we proposed, we're not against that. We just try to make a balanced plan. The other point I have is the continued confusion I hear about the zoning. The balance in the general plan is plan development, trade, commercial. There's no M1, there's no C1. That is in the old map that predates even the older, the 1980, the map that is called a general plan zoning map is totally out of date. And these references that I keep hearing to that map as if that was the general plan. It's not. And you should really take care of that. Have the correct map and the correct zoning that you're discussing instead of all these C1s and M1s, for the balance.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Okay. Can you explain that a little more?
The general plan is supposed to have its attendant map, zoning map. You do not have a zoning map that's consistent with the adopted general plan. Since 94, it has not been made. You are using an old, obsolete map, and therefore these references really are not correct. And it just confuses when you have this. You should talk about trade, commercial, entire balance, and then make sub areas. Yeah, I agree with you. All this discussion you've had is really good. And you can do it that way, but please don't refer to old, obsolete maps.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jonathan Scharfman. Well, I think that was addressed many times before. So, I mean, if the staff would like to.
I think it might be useful to have the staff come up with a little discussion on that whole thing to correct that.
Well,
don't have to do it tonight, but some other time we can schedule.
Oh yeah, we can certainly. There's a long history on this particular issue that we can certainly provide you some background information for your use.
Yeah, let's put it in the next meeting agenda or something whenever it's appropriate.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Jonathan Sharpman, representing the project sponsor. Thank you very much again for your thoughtful consideration of our proposal. And frankly, our vision to transform the historic polluting uses of the Brisbane Baylands into a productive, vital, integral part of Brisbane's future. And to that point, I would like you to take very seriously, and I would like the folks watching at home to take very seriously the consideration that's being discussed here about allowing the same uses, the same historic uses for waste recovery and for rail yards that really left the toxic legacy behind on this site in the first place. We ask you to thoughtfully consider that, and should you choose to allow those uses even in their 21st century form, please consider whether adjacent to the transit-rich area next to the Bayshore Caltrain station and adjacent to where it might be more appropriate for jobs and potentially other uses like housing could be located. Because should you choose those uses, you might consider, as Mr. Varejos had mentioned in several meetings past, to locate Recology's expansion elsewhere, or to locate potentially the high-speed rail yard elsewhere on the site. So we just ask you to think about that very, very seriously, and also to keep in mind that both of those uses are proposed on on without any consent or any agreement from the landowner, and I believe that any reasonable landowner would have to assert their private property rights, and any Brisbane resident or business owner that were subject to the same to the same conditions would certainly want to assert their private property rights in the face of those public takings. And so that's just something we want to make sure is also well understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, Ms. Dana Dilworth, it was listed here as under oral communication, which is actually item E. So that was presumed to be under oral communications, but there was a change, and it's in response to the deliberations tonight.
Well, thank you. Safety should be number one before you deliberate anything. And I want to thank Commissioner Anderson for including the liquefaction map in the review that you put together. And I have a list of 4 videos or YouTube videos I would like you to see. It's and they're listed. She'll give you the information. You would Google soil liquefaction in Japan, Japan earth moving, and then one I just called news coverage because it's in Japanese. But if you review the liquefaction map, that should be the end of the story. The only other uses considered for the Bay land should be ones that limit the number of people who might be present during an earthquake. There are additional videos that show how buildings on landfill collapse and fold. About your earlier deliberations, one, I wanted to, when I see the land uses we're discussing, open space is a land use, it has not been covered well enough, in my opinion. In the January 28th meeting on basic principles, it was suggested that you allow a phased cleanup. This is unconscionable. There are several endangerment orders on several different properties out there. It is the lead agency's responsibility to get a plan for a cleanup. The toxins still leak into the bay in spite of the interim measures that have been put in place. So a plan to not clean up is not acceptable, and it should come up from your CEQA people saying that's not acceptable. We have been waiting for a plan for over 20 years. Even the language of, and I find it ironic that I'm going to stand here and say, we've got to come up with a plan because the city is negligent if this doesn't get cleaned up. And I don't know if you want to know the story, but when these lands were originally considered, they were going to be federal Superfund sites. But the state of California came in and said, no, we've got an equal agency that's equal to what you can do. We will take care of this. And this is 28 frickin' years later, and very little has been done. And actually, I also heard the proposal admonishing you to make some choices. By law, all you have to do is not double negative. You have to allow uses. You don't have to allow the uses they want. You just have to give them an opportunity to gain revenue from their property. We do not have to approve the plan. Even in that meeting of 128, even the language of unbroken blocks of open space may be questionable if you don't make certain that that open space is clean and healthy, and also part of an integrated environmental design. So having isolated open space really is pretty meaningless. Additionally, the applicant has said that we will get 300 acres of open space in the form of the lagoon. This calculation, or rather trick to the public, should not be allowed. The lagoon is another district. It is not land. It is not the Baylands. It is also something that cannot be changed because it is waters of the state, and we the public own the edge of the lagoon. It's in the hands of the state Lands Commission. I want you to be careful about defining things, because you have retail, and then all of a sudden, well, little retail, but big retail, and specifically define your rail-related activities, because it could be as minuscule as a little kiosk, or it could be the entire Baylands used for rail yard facilities. And frankly, you're going to say, gee, this is interesting coming from you. Because the Baylands was filled for transportation purposes, and it is in the public trust, the public's interest, that it remain as a transit facility or a transit. The loss of the bay for the use of transportation should be maintained, in my opinion. But in defining rail-related activities, got to be sure that you don't allow a rail yard that could store crude oil tankers. And this is something I brought up to the city of Brisbane. They have refused, or at least chosen not to even take acknowledgement of it. But the crude oil is now being transported on the rail lines. It's coming into Richmond. It's coming into the Tesoro refinery. It is a big deal to be transporting crude oil on tankers right now. We need to have a policy that prohibits that. But we can just sit back and talk about rail-related activities without being careful in our definition. And I think that definition should be very careful to state that we want a train museum, not just a related activity. I have a whole lot more to say, but being limited to 3 minutes and trying to catch up on some other meetings, I will thank you for your time now and see you again sometime later.
And maybe
Thank
email us your...
She has a copy.
Yeah, if you have more, email us anytime.
Oh, well, the only other thing that's written on there that I didn't say is in earlier meetings when I was attending the meetings on the San Francisco side, San Francisco wants to put a rail yard for their end of the line on this property as well. So if you guys are just talking 100 acres for high speed, you might kind of look at the bigger picture of other, especially if you just leave rail-related activities and not confine it either by definition of the definition or the amount of space. The whole Baylands could become a rail yard, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying you got to be careful with your language and be clear what's acceptable and not. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alvin Dewey.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see everybody again. Good evening, residents of Brisbane. I'm Alvin Dewey, a 16-year resident of Brisbane, and I've lived in this area, the region, for over 50 years. When we look at this development, I think we should look at this development from a sense of regional development. I know we kind of compartmentalize everything into Brisbane, but we got to realize that everything that has been built around us for the last so many years, we have to use all the resources of this area. And we haven't participated in any bit of the development of this area. And it kind of, when you think about it, there's 4,000 people in the city, and we're going to be voting and determining the outcome of 700 acres of land that is going to be used not just by Brisbane, but it's going to be used by up to over 1 million people. So we should be able to kind of look at this project from that perspective. And if we're going to look at it, all these different ideas that were presented tonight, and I missed a lot of earlier because I wasn't here because I was at a function earlier, but they're all good ideas. and they all have a place within that Baylands 700 acres. If we can kind of like, hey, let's not put more than 10% of the total land use to any one of these projects, then we're able to probably maximize the greater use of that land. Because there's just so many needs for that land. You know, it's the most valuable piece of property anywhere in this area. And at this time and place in the Bay Area, there is such a great need for so many different things. We should look at trying to utilize this land, get the most yield out of that land for the benefit of the region, not just the city of Brisbane. There's so many job opportunities, all these things that you mentioned earlier, education, health facilities, recreational area, wildlife areas, research and development, residential areas, commercial areas, entertainment, technology development, manufacturing, public service facilities, hotel conventions. There's enough for everything. My personal opinion is that I think high-speed rail, if we put too much of it, it'll be a waste of. I think there's a greater need in this region for those other things that I mentioned than high-speed rail, warehousing, and recology. We shouldn't waste this opportunity and we should take our time and be cautious in how we rush to corner some market. I believe that what benefits this region benefits Brisbane in the long run, because we all have families and friends that live in this area. We all have jobs and livelihood. So we should look at that Baylands in that context. This development is not going to just be used by us. It's going to be used by everybody. So I think we should take the time and realize that Brisbane needs to be a viable community, and we need to be able to contribute to the overall region. And I think everybody pretty much knows my opinion, but I am 100% for development of housing on that property, because without housing, you're not going to have a sustainable development. And I think it's about time that we accept and embrace the future scale of that development. I hear all these little things, we should do this, we should do that, but when you look at this big picture in the long run, it's a huge project. It's a monumentous project. There's nothing bigger in this region than what's going to happen in that Baylands. It's going to happen. We should look at it and accept it and look at it from that perspective. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Tony Varios.
Commissioners, I'm a director of San Francisco Trains, which is an organization that's interested in the preservation of the Roundhouse and restoration of a locomotive out there on the Baylands right now. And as part of that project, I was happy to hear Mr. Zola say that the Roundhouse should be immediately protected. I think that was the term that he used. I don't know what that means in terms of English, because immediate to me means it should have been started already. Maybe that's immediately after a permit is issued, which could be 5 or 10 years from now. I don't know. But I'd like to have some clarification on what that means, because every day that we do nothing allows more deterioration over there and would eventually just increase the cost of whatever work gets done, regardless of who's paying for it. So it's a conservative approach to try to do something as soon as possible, in my opinion. And I'm speaking now not for myself, but on the benefit of the board of directors of San Francisco Trains. And we're looking at the Roundhouse as to be identified as a Brisbane Bayshore Roundhouse Museum complex in a concept level at this point. Our organization has not had extensive discussions with the developer about this yet, or the city. And so all of the ideas that we have discussed in our deliberations of our board are not generally public or clearly defined. But as I listen to the discussions this evening, I'm hearing different things that would impact anything that might happen there very directly. And one of them is the preservation issue, and next is the stabilization of the roundhouse itself. Another is the recreation of a spur line from an existing switch that's there now. I can't tell you exactly where it is, but there's a switch on the main line, and it used to have a spur line coming off of it that went to around Industrial Way and to the roundhouse itself, and now that track has been ripped out. We have track and materials to rebuild it, but it doesn't exist. And unless there's a plan to put that back in, the roundhouse itself would be isolated. In addition to that, if I could trouble you to put up the slide of the first slide that Commissioner Reinhardt had this evening, it showed the developer's roundhouse area plan, a picture of it. And if you look at that, or could put it up, Julia, I don't know if you can, or Dave, thank you. The developer's plan is to create, as I understand it, a tech hub, some kind of R&D hub with buildings situated adjacent to the current roundhouse and tank and boiler building that's occupied currently by Lazari Fuel. And those that design that's contemplated, you can't really see it without the lights coming down. That design, thank you, Julia. In that design, all of the buildings that are shown with white borders on the roofs there essentially dwarf the current tank and boiler shop building, which is in the center of them. Those are very, very large buildings in terms of concept, and would, in our opinion, not be consistent with what we'd like to see developed in that area if it becomes a museum. At the same time, there was also a mention of a historical, I think, Native American component museum type educational situation, and we could certainly incorporate that with the Railhouse Museum very easily. But we don't see a museum being a viable alternative unless it has a component attached to it that can generate profit, because there is no museum around that we've seen in general that makes any money. They lose money, and they're very dependent. Like the State Railroad Museum is funded by our taxpayer dollars in Sacramento. It's big money. Without that, it probably would not exist. So we're looking at a concept where we would have recreational uses there, educational uses there, that would include running model trains inside that tank and boiler shop building that's there now, and running a small train, a family-oriented train similar to what you see at the zoo in San Francisco and Oakland, smaller than the Oakland one, but like the one they have in San Francisco. They call it a puffer train, small thing. And that would be a recreational use. So we wouldn't want to be precluded from that. And at the same time, we're hoping that while in the worst possible case scenario, we put our engine number 4 back together and it gets stuck in a stall at the roundhouse as a static display with nothing else there. That's a worst case scenario for us. That would be a success because it would preserve the engine and the roundhouse. But it would be a huge failure for Brisbane in our opinion, because there's no vision there. It misses the point of what we really could create. On a visionary scale, we could make it a great business opportunity with restaurant, the museum, state-of-the-art, similar to the Exploratorium on that level, high quality, high end. It would become the first actual tourist attraction in Brisbane. It would bring people here for a reason, and it would give our students a free opportunity to come there. All the classes, the students could all come for free and take advantage of all of the educational opportunity that would be created by that museum complex. But we're hoping that it could be a working train museum, not on a real large scale, but enough to actually run that locomotive in and out of the facility. And you can't do that without track, and you can't do that if the area is surrounded by a park on wetlands. And so all the different competing ideas that are valid have to be extremely well coordinated in order to not preclude this other use. And of course, the developer hasn't even had an opportunity to deal with some of these ideas, so I wouldn't want to characterize their position on it. They may be hearing it for the first time on this level. But we also understand that what I thought is we talked to the people that run the South San Francisco Convention Center. And I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but they are going to expand. They don't have enough space. Their business is so good, and they're making so much money at that convention center now, it's public record, you can see it online, that they want to expand their facility. I'm not sure if they want to double it or what the size limit is, and of course they don't have the restrictions on their site use that we have in Brisbane. Brisbane has many other considerations that they don't have because they're out there on the other side of Airport Boulevard, where they're not interfering with housing and other commute issues. But if we could put a convention center next to that tank and boiler building right on Geneva, obviously allowing the right-of-way for the Geneva connection to go through, that would create an opportunity where Brisbane would pick up the income, and the income from that facility would also be able to pay for all of the money-losing museum venture there. So that's part of our thoughts. And of course, in addition to that, there would probably be a hotel. A hotel had been mentioned on the transit hub, and that would probably dovetail in very nicely with this. But the bottom line is none of these ideas are going to ever happen unless everybody can come to a win-win position where the citizens like it, the city council likes it, the staff approves it, thinks it's good, the developer likes it. Everybody's got to be working together. Otherwise, nothing happens but gridlock. So I appreciate your consideration of those issues. And lastly, when it comes to the Recology expansion, there definitely are alternatives or could be alternatives for Recology if San Francisco cared to create them. San Francisco has plenty of land to push all the Recology operations into San Francisco and consolidate them there, first-class, state-of-the-art operations. They chose not to do that. They chose housing. And for obvious reasons, money, and they need housing really badly. So so I don't oppose, now I'm speaking as an individual Brisbane resident and business owner, I don't oppose the Recology expansion into Brisbane, but I do think you need to be very well aware of the issues that are involved with that operation, even in its state-of-the-art iteration. Right now, if you have a view of the current operations, you see lots of lights. That's a big negative impact from my perspective. And they have a need for those lights for safety of their working people over there. So you really have to look at these things very carefully when you're setting your parameters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Joe Diaz.
Good evening, Honorable Planning Commissioners. Joel Diaz. I just wanted to touch briefly on the school and the notion of having schools out there, and I'm glad to hear that sounds like people are very concerned about it. And just setting aside the toxic issues and how dangerous that would be in putting kids in close proximity with that kind of toxicity seems like a very unnecessary risk. But I think that we really need to be careful, and I feel like you guys are very analytical, but we have to be, the public probably needs to be careful about what they believe and how readily they believe things, because sometimes we hear stories and they seem very plausible on the surface and they're easy for us to believe, and sometimes we want to believe them. And a myth that's kind of been circulating around for a lot of years, and I was sort of guilty of believing it too for a long time, was that somehow the Baylands is going to generate a lot of revenue for our school systems, or the Bayshore school system. And it sounds good on the surface, but after I started kind of doing the math and researching it and crunching the numbers, it started to not make a lot of sense. And what happens is, right off the top, a lot of the revenue is going to go to pay for improvements, the infrastructure improvements. And when we start looking at, like, for example, the Brisbane school budget, the number of kids that are there, there's about 500 kids in the Brisbane school district, over 3 schools, and that's about 3,000 residences between Brisbane and Daly City. Now we've got 500 kids, about 15% of the amount of homes that are out there. And the budget is somewhere around $7 million a year, and all of it is used, and we are hurting for money. And that money goes primarily to pay for teachers, and we all know that teachers don't make very much money. And that's what it costs to run a school of 500 kids, about $7 million. So if we build more schools out there, it's going to cost that kind of money to run them, but it's also going to cost an extreme amount of money to build them, in capital improvements. The cost of building, say, 3 schools, like K through 12, would be potentially more schools. You know, what if it was $100 million just to build? The taxpayers pay that. School districts issue bonds. Then the school district has to run it. And I know that if you proposition the school district and ask them to double their workload and not make any more money, I don't think they'd be too happy about that proposition. I know I wouldn't, most people wouldn't want to work twice as hard and not take home any more profit. It doesn't make any sense. Our school district is already in a lot of financial difficulty. We depend heavily on parcel taxes. There's a parcel tax coming up for renewal right now, and I ask that everyone please renew the parcel tax for art and music. We need it desperately. We are in no position to chase after owning, building, and controlling new schools anywhere else. The idea that we will make money from that is a complete myth. And personally, and I don't think I've ever said this before, that I personally believe that if we maintain Brisbane as a green place, literally green, looking green, for the next 10 years, our real estate is going to appreciate exponentially. And it is by restricting development that real estate appreciates the most. It will generate the cities more money. It will generate our current schools more money. It will make all of our real estate extremely valuable. It will make all of the vacant land that can still be developed extremely valuable. And a lot of these ideas about developing to the maximum necessitate things: infrastructure, schools, police forces, fire departments. It starts to become a very burdensome thing, just like it is for the school district. It doesn't make sense for the schools to want to be a part of it. It shouldn't make sense for us to want to be a part of it, unless it's somehow so financially lucrative and beneficial to the community that it makes sense to do so. And right now, the way that this is set up, the way that our system is set up, this is what people refer to as malinvestment. It is a very inefficient use of capital. It is a very inefficient use of resources. And this development is spurred on because of conditions in the marketplace that benefit the investors and the developers to want to do it. But in the end, as we are in control of this, it'll become very burdensome for us, and it will not be the most productive use of our resources. And so that's how I feel. I would personally like to preserve Brisbane the way it is for at least another 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That's what we have for the public comments section. So we can move on to the items initiated by the city.
I want to make one correction. Mr. John Searson during the break mentioned it to me that I might have said that the developer plan is not extensive. They have not enough work or is not equal to the others. But it's a specific plan, so they have done a lot more than the other plans. When I said about the high-speed alternatives, I might have misspoke, so I want to correct that their plan, they did spend a lot of time to analyze various impacts, and the environmental impact report shows that.
Okay, duly noted. So items initiated by the staff?
Just maybe to talk about schedule forthcoming. We're anticipating a March 10th meeting for the Baylands, and then a March 24th meeting for regular Planning Commission business. So that's kind of the schedule we're anticipating for the next month, unless the Commission has any changes or issues with that particular schedule.
Yeah, that schedule should be okay. Presently, I think Commissioner Anderson did send an email regarding his absence in the later part of March. Or
Yeah, I'm available for both of the meetings in March.
yeah, but he said he's yes.
But he's available.
He's available.
I'm available.
So we're okay.
I'm not going to, since his regular meeting and there's something else that is scheduled that I should attend.
Can't hear you.
I said since it's a regular meeting and there's something else I'm supposed to be doing at the same time, I think I'll probably excuse myself from that particular meeting.
That's the 24th, right?
The 24th.
That should be okay as long.
Yeah.
We'll still have quorum.
But my question is that going to be, are we going to be able to keep on schedule?
Well, certainly a once a month meeting on the Baylands would make it problematic to finish by the end of April. I mean, if we want to start looking at extra meetings and scheduling additional meetings, we could talk about that and see what makes sense for the commission. When we do have regular business, we need to fit into these meetings, and I don't think it's very efficient to do that and a Baylands meeting in the same night. So if you want to add an extra meeting for the Baylands separate from a regular business meeting, we're certainly open to that if that's
Not a good time for
pleasure.
you to plan.
You can go ahead and plan,
I think
but
at this
think
point,
that
I don't think we should add some more meetings.
You don't?
I mean,
No, I don't wish to add any more meetings either.
Okay. Not for March.
Not for March.
maybe we can discuss in April, but at this point, I don't think we should add any more meetings.
Any other opinions?
I mean, I am open to additional meetings, but it's
Yeah, I'm also open to it, but I think that's a TBD issue.
yeah, just because of
I don't think anybody's in a position to answer right now in terms of the calendar.
no.
Okay? Yeah? Items initiated by the commission. Anything from the commission?
No.
No? Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn to a regular meeting of March 10th?
Since I haven't made any motions, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay. So I consider that a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn until March 10th.
Okay. Can we have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Good night.